Elias Boone had long ago learned that the desert was not empty, though to most men it seemed nothing but miles of barren earth and stone. To him, it whispered with voices carried on the wind, the kind that sank into your bones when you had nothing left but silence for company. And Elias, a poor rancher who owned more debts than cattle, more regrets than tools, was a man who carried silence like a second skin, his life carved by hardship as relentless as the sun overhead. He lived on a patch of land too dry for most crops and too barren for fat herds, and the few cattle he kept alive were more ghosts than beasts, their ribs showing through hide like fence rails left to rot, and yet he stayed because leaving meant surrender, and surrender was something the Boone blood had never done. His father had died with his boots on, defending land from drought, rustlers, and his own bad luck, and Elias, though weary, stubbornly bore that torch. That morning, hunger had gnawed at his belly with sharper teeth than usual, the larder near empty, and when he saw that one calf had strayed into the canyon beyond his grazing grounds, he felt a flicker of desperate hope. It was scrawny, yes, but even a scrawny calf meant milk or meat, and so he saddled his gray mare, a creature as worn and tired as he, and rode into the wild country. The mare, whose ribs stood out like wagon spokes, plodded with a weary gait, her breath labored, her eyes dulled, but she followed him because loyalty was bred deep into her bones, and Elias whispered to her as though she were a friend, telling her stories in fragments, promises he could not keep, apologies for a life that asked too much. The sun was a hammer that day, pounding heat into the earth until the rocks themselves seemed to breathe fire, and yet Elias pressed deeper into the canyon, following faint tracks etched in the dust, tracks that seemed to waver and fade as though reluctant to lead him further, and in truth a voice in his gut whispered caution. This was Apache country, and no white man wandered it without danger. But necessity is a ruthless master, and Elias had long ago learned that fear does not feed a man's belly, so he tightened his jaw, squinted against the blaze of light, and kept going, his hand resting unconsciously near the worn handle of his rifle. The canyon walls rose higher with each step, closing in like the jaws of some vast beast, their surfaces painted with streaks of iron red and shadow black, and the sound of the world changed, less wind, less bird song, only the echo of hooves on stone, a hollow beat that made the hair on the back of Elias's neck rise. It felt less like entering a canyon and more like walking into a cathedral built by time and silence, and the weight of it pressed down on him until even his stubbornness wavered. He muttered to himself to keep the fear at bay, words like, just a calf, that's all, just a calf, but deep down he knew he was trespassing into a story larger than hunger or livestock, something that had waited here long before his boots scuffed the dust. Then, as he rounded a bend where the canyon floor widened just enough for his mare to breathe easier, his heart slammed hard in his chest, and his hand flew to his rifle without thought, for there, standing before him in the slanted light of afternoon, were two figures that did not belong to the world he knew. They were women, yes, but not as any women Elias Boone had ever seen. They were tall, so tall that even from the saddle he had to tilt his head upward to meet their gaze, and their presence filled the canyon like thunderclouds fill the sky before rain. Their skin bore the bronze fire of the desert sun, their limbs long and corded with strength, and their hair, black as raven wings, fell in heavy braids adorned with feathers and beads that whispered softly when the canyon breeze stirred. One of them stood firm, straight as a pine, her hand gripping a spear taller than any man Elias had known, the flint point catching the light with a glint of cold promise, while the other leaned against her sister, her weight borne awkwardly, her face pale beneath its natural hue, and from her thigh protruded the broken shaft of an arrow, blood darkening the buckskin around it, trickling down to stain the earth.